Hello. How are you?
Hi.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Megan Shapiro. I am a construction attorney, and I am passionate about proactive risk management for construction leaders. If you have just stumbled over here, this is a live stream podcast combo called Risk to Revenue, where we talk about all things proactive risk management as it relates to construction companies. I try to have guests join me, and today we are super fortunate to have, oh no, I've got the wrong banners preloaded, Nanette. Hang on one second. There we go. Nanette Miner is joining us.
Hi, everyone.
So give them your background, Nanette.
Oh, boy. Okay. So the long story is I've been in business 33 years this month, actually. For 25 years, I custom designed curriculums for companies and handed it back to them for implementation. As you can probably imagine, being in business that long, I've done a couple of pivots. When I first started in training and development, if you wanted colored overheads, you had to color them in with magic markers the night before. They were acetates, and you put them on the overhead projector.
Oh.
So we've come a long way from there. So there's been a number of pivots. I'll speed the story up to 2015. I was getting bored with doing instructional design. I had been doing it for 25 years at that point. And I thought to myself, what's the next chapter? Where do I go from here? Do I go back to school and do something entirely different? Do I just go to a different kind of lane? And right around that same time, the US Census came out and said that all the boomers were going to be out of the workforce by 2030. And I had worked for so many Fortune 500 companies and been inside how they did their development, professional development, and their leadership development specifically. And I realized nobody was really getting younger workers prepared for future leadership roles. They were waiting until they promoted someone to a leadership role and then asked them to, go through all this leadership training and basically change their behavior after many years on the job. But the boomer generation was so big that they stayed in jobs much longer than younger people do. They had careers in companies, right? And that generation was so big that even when a boomer left, they were replaced with another boomer. So companies never had to think about how do I get the next generation or even the next generation prepared for a leadership role. So I thought that is something that really excites me. I really love small businesses and helping them be successful. And if I could bring leadership development to them, that would be a savior, really, because if the big companies aren't doing it right, then the smaller companies probably aren't even thinking about it. So I did leadership development for a few years. And the more I kept talking about all the aspects of leadership development and how you should roll it out in your company and the savings it's going to bring you and the longevity is going to bring you, I realized really what I was talking about was succession planning, because you are not going to have a company in 10 or 15 years if you don't have a pipeline of ready and capable leaders. So really what I do is help companies with their succession planning. And I do that by helping them identify future leaders and then what development those people need to be prepared so that you don't promote them first and then say, oh, hey, now we're going to teach you all the special sauce that we didn't teach you in the previous 15 or 20 years.
Yes, I love that. And I'm just going to quickly say, in case anybody is live streaming with us on LinkedIn, feel free to join the conversation with the chat. If you've been with me on any of my live streams for the last few months, you know that there is a little bit of a glitch between LinkedIn and StreamYard, and they sometimes don't always connect. So if you are commenting on the live stream and I don't acknowledge it or see it, don't think that is intentional. I'm not ignoring you. It's just not coming through the stream. So just be aware of that. But if you have any questions that you would like Nanette to talk about on the live stream, definitely pop those into the comments as well. If we don't see them and they don't come up, I'm sure Nanette will be in the comments after the live stream is over. You can also connect with her and we'll give you the information for how to connect with Nanette at the end.
Yep.
Okay. So for those who might not be familiar, can you explain, you talked a little bit about how succession planning is important to make sure that you've got somebody in the company that's going to step up. But can you talk about exactly what succession planning is, at what point construction leaders should start to kind of think about it, and how it might look different for different companies?
So I would say every construction leader needs to start thinking about it today. Primarily, the industry is filled with a bunch of owner founders who've been in the field for 30 and 40 years. I mean, that's primarily who I see. So they should be thinking about retiring or turning their company over to the employees via an ESOP or selling. Any one of those scenarios, you need capable people who know how to run the business and also lead others for you to be able to exit your company. So everybody should be a candidate for succession planning, most especially if you think you're going to leave in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's how long it takes to get people prepared to step up into senior leadership roles. And I will say there's definitely a demarcation between succession in terms of people leaving the C-suite and replacing those folks, and then the succession pipeline where you could be starting with a 28-year-old because you think in 15 years that person could be a branch manager. So I concentrate on C-suite because those people are generally boomers or Gen X, which is right behind the boomers. A lot of them have left the workforce as well. So I'm always looking at the C-suite, but part of helping them be prepared for the future is also looking at that pipeline coming up as well. So one of the things I always tell clients is you shouldn't have one successor in mind. You should have at least 3 successors in mind, because anything that happens to you could happen to that one chosen successor, right? So you should be preparing at least 3 people directly underneath you. So if something should happen, they could step in tomorrow. But also those 3 people should have 3 people, and those next 3 should also have 3. So everybody should be bringing up potential replacements to replace themselves so they can move up as well. I think I missed the second part.
So it's kind of like the domino effect, right? So if your successor is coming up, somebody's got to fill their role. So it's, I see what you're saying there. So what I'm hearing is, regardless of the size of the company, the longevity of the company, how long an owner has had the company in business, at some point there's going to be an exit, right? Whatever that looks like might take different forms, but all exits still have to be planned for, right? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
And most company executives, when they think, oh, I'm going to exit my business, they go to see their wealth advisor or they go to see their attorney, and they don't think about the internal workings. And I will tell you, actually, the reason I had this aha moment was I was listening to a podcast with one of the 2 brothers that founded Solo Stove. And at the time I listened to that podcast, I didn't even know what Solo Stove was. And then I look over at my neighbor's backyard and go, oh, they have one, but I didn't know what it was. But the 2 brothers had built that company to $7 million, and they decided they were going to sell it. And they went to an attorney or a business broker, I don't know, I don't recall. And that person said, you don't have anything to sell. And they're like, what are you talking about? We have a $7 million business. And he said, you are the business. You do all the procurement, the manufacturing, the customer service, the shipping, the finance. You guys do everything. When you walk away, there is no business. So they had to spend 3 years getting a COO, starting an actual customer service department, getting a CFO, like establishing a business so that they could sell it and exit. And that's mostly in the construction industry and the AEC field in general, is people who run these smaller companies. It's their passion. They've done it their whole lives. Everything's in their head, and you're just not going to be able to walk away successfully. I mean, you can walk away, but if you want to walk away on a high, like I've left a fabulous legacy in my town, or I got a great valuation for my company when I sold it, you have to have people who can run the company when you leave. A friend of mine calls it CEO dominance. You don't want CEO dominance.
I love that. And so I'm all about step-by-step actionable strategies. And so what I'm thinking about as I'm hearing you talk about these considerations is that it seems to me like step 1 for any construction leader is first figure out what kind of exit you want to have, because that foundational sort of decision, it's like a decision tree in my mind, right? It's like, okay, well, if you want to sell, then your succession plan is going to look one way. If it's a family owned business, like so many construction companies are, and your child is the succession plan, adult child, or maybe not, then that's going to be a specific set of steps that you're going to take. If you want to convert to an ESOP, that's a whole lot more steps that you want to take, right? So I'm hearing like, okay, I don't care if you just started your business last year, you might want to start giving some thought to eventually what kind of exit do you want to have?
Yes. Yep. And I will say that my lane is just getting your future leaders prepared. So, like you said, with an ESOP, I mean, that can be a 10-year process as well. And I don't even know how that process works. I would just refer you to the ESOP Association to be guided through that. So, I don't know all the processes in exit strategies, but my lane is how do you get your future leaders prepared so you can get the best valuation and confidently lead. I connected with a guy on LinkedIn. I haven't talked with him yet, but like a week or two ago, he said to me, I know where you're coming from. I sold my business and I watched the new owners run it into the ground for a year. And I'm like, oh, can we talk so I can hear what that story is? Not that I shouldn't have been gleeful about that, but I'm like, that's the kind of stories I want to have in my back pocket. You know, I'm like, oh, that must have been making you so heart sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it seems like, from my observation, as I say, I'm a construction attorney, but I do business law, right? So construction companies are one kind of business. So we do actually at the firm represent other kinds of businesses as well. And so we have been involved in a lot of the legal sides of succession planning. We've converted several companies to ESOPs and we've been involved in that process. But we've also been a part of just sort of the standard traditional quote unquote mergers and acquisitions, where, to your point, a lot of times that deal is structured so that the exiting or selling owner, CEO, president, whatever title they've given themselves, they're now, on payroll for a period of time, 2 to 5 years, and they're supposed to help with the transition. And based on my observations, that doesn't always necessarily go as well as I think either party conceives that it will. And I attribute that maybe to a lack of understanding of what the process is going to look like, and maybe not talking to somebody like you to prepare for that.
Right. I just actually wrote an article for law.com that was aimed at attorneys, so attorneys know what I do. Because I said, like I said to you earlier, if you're going to sell your business, one of the first two people you'll go see is an attorney. And I want your attorney to go, have you had a consultation with a succession person? Because we're just going to help you more if you have capable people in that pipeline. And yeah, it sounds like in terms of your firm, actually a lot more about the legal side of transitioning than I do.
Yeah, and I'm going a little bit off of our questions here because free flowing conversation. But one of the things that I have encountered in dealing with succession for construction companies specifically that might be a bit unique from other small and medium sized businesses is the consideration of the license, the construction license. Like they have to have an RMO or right, and so is that something that you usually deal with your construction? No,
No, not at all. Nope. I'm strictly like an arm of HR on the professional development side.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so then now we'll pop back down to the question that we actually have here. So what inspired you to specialize in succession planning for small and medium-sized businesses specifically, as opposed to, the bigger Fortune 500 companies, for example?
Alluded to that in my intro, is that I worked with Fortune 500 companies for 25 years, and I saw that they weren't doing it well. I have a specific methodology that I tried to go back and sell to my former clients because I had a relationship with them, and they were all like, oh no, we have our processes and we have our internal universities. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not going to work. We need to speed things up and you're not doing things in a logical way. So then I just kind of, pivoted and said, well, who really does need this knowledge is the small or medium-sized company that doesn't have a training director at all, that has an HR person who's overwhelmed with so many other things. They're not focused on professional development. And with my 30 plus years in the business, like the construction owner, it's all up here. I have it all up here. I can, look at your employee workforce and go, okay, I know who needs to be slotted where and what development they need and where you should go get that and how you can bring that to them or send them out to something. It's ingrained in me.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think that oftentimes that particular component of what an outside perspective can do is undervalued and often overlooked. I like to refer to this concept as sort of, I call them risk blind spots. And there's just and there's just something so powerful about this outside perspective with fresh eyes that isn't ingrained in like, well, I remember when Susie started as the receptionist and I can't envision her in 10 years being the next CEO of this company, right? When you're so close to it, it really blocks your ability to see some of the pathways that might be possible. And I think that's one of the biggest selling points and benefits to bringing in an outside third party like yourself who can come in and say like, man, I've been doing this forever. I've done this with so many companies. I know exactly what characteristics and attributes are going to make successful successors. And these people in your team have those things. Let's do what we have to do to keep them here.
Right, to keep them here. Good point.
To keep them here.
I'm actually writing an article for Construction Management Association. I write a monthly article on leadership, and my article for June is that you need retention before I can do succession planning for you. If you can't keep people past 5 years, you don't need me. You have a different problem, right?
Right. Because then you're really more looking at sort of like corporate headhunters. Right now you're looking at poaching successful CEOs from another company to come in and take over because you haven't done the things that are required to cultivate your own team, support them, nurture them, and incentivize them to want to stay, right?
Right. And it's generally because people don't see that there's a career path for them. Again, owners keep everything in their head. So they might say like that person's got a future, and I can really see that 4 or 5 years they're going to be over here, and then they leave, and you're like, why'd you leave? Oh, I didn't, because you never told me I had a future here. I've been laboring at this job for 18 months, and I'm bored. I do want to kind of correct you on something that you said a minute ago, though, about how when you're so close to it, outside perspective is beneficial. I wouldn't say, I mean, that is true, but in addition, it's not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Like if you run a small business, you generally started it because you're good at what you do, or you felt you could do it better than the company that you worked at previously, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're an expert in what you do, and you don't even know I exist. Right? And I'm an expert in what I do, and I don't know how to run a construction firm. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonate with that so much because being an attorney, it's a little bit different, right? Because everybody knows what attorneys are, and everybody usually has a pretty good intuitive feel for when they need one, even if it's outside of litigation. But as I've pivoted into sort of like really working on training construction leaders on implementing some sort of proactive risk management strategies in-house, it's the same sort of thing. They're like, well, wait, what? I didn't even know that was a problem. And it's like, I know you didn't. That's why you need somebody like me, right? Because you didn't know that you could be doing this strategic corporate formation strategy that could decrease your tax liability and bolster your asset protection and shift the risk from liability exposure. They just don't know what they don't know. And so I think right. I'm glad you threw that in. That's a big one. That is a big one.
And can I say too, that the whole reason that you and I found each other on LinkedIn was because I had a client last summer when I was creating their professional development plans for the people in their succession. What came up in conversation was there are 3 people in our organization who we think could be C-suite executives, but none of them have any risk management knowledge. And so I was tasked with finding a resource to teach them that. And there's just not a lot of resources out there. I ended up finding them a local attorney who said he could do it, but that's not the same as you having a defined process that people can not only learn, but also go back and review when necessary, and then also have you as a resource. So I was so thrilled when I found you.
Yeah, I similarly, I was as well. It was a law firm client, so I can't say too much about it, but I actually referred somebody to you as an initial conversation because I'm dealing with this all the time with, again, usually smaller, mid-sized or family-owned construction companies that are kind of grappling with like, okay, the head honcho who started this company in the 70s is now getting ready to retire. And what does that look like? And what are we going to do? And, people just don't, I didn't even know that somebody like you existed. Just like,
exactly.
I existed, right? It's like the power of LinkedIn, I guess, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, it's really, you used a phrase when you were talking about this at the top, that I use this similar language around this as well. It's like, we have a process. And I think that's the key. Like you're right. If you get a knowledgeable business attorney who has done any amount of succession or mergers or acquisitions or ESOP conversions or whatever it is, they can walk somebody through it, but that's a different thing. That's a different outcome really for the client than having a specific identified articulated process of like this. No, I know how to teach you this. I know how to transfer this knowledge from me to you. here's what you need to do, right? And I think that that's a commonality that I think we share in terms of how we approach our clients.
Yes, it's funny because you and I both launched a class around like within 2 weeks of each other too, which we didn't know the other was doing. But I want to drill down into something you just said because you hit the nail on the head. No pun intended. My approach to consulting, like your approach to the work that you do, is I don't want you to be dependent on me. I am going to transfer my knowledge to you. So when I work with a client and then create this professional development plan for the people in their pipeline, they get to implement it. I'm not there with them through the implementation process. You have a roadmap, you can follow it. And, if you need me in the future, we can always consult, but I'm not one of those consultants like, okay, now I'm here for 3 years.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point because I think sometimes people have gotten so used to that model that I think they expect that, and even with attorneys, especially coming as, drawing on my background as an attorney, people are like, okay, another billable event, another opportunity for the blood sucking attorney to get their fangs into another client and just keep, milking. And like I say on LinkedIn often, I'm like, I want to make myself unnecessary. Like I never want to have you as a law firm client. I don't want to be your lawyer. I want to give you what I have so you don't need me.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. I don't want you to be my client because that means we're in a bad spot potentially.
Exactly. I mean, look, every litigation is inevitable, right? It's inevitable in business. It's certainly inevitable in construction, but like there are things you can do to minimize the likelihood that you're going to get into litigation. I can give you tools to minimize the likelihood that you're going to need me or another attorney. So, but again, that's another podcast. Okay, let's see. Can you share some examples of the risks involved when companies neglect succession planning?
Oh, well, I mean, the obvious is you lose your business development guy and now you're screwed. Right? That person decided to retire. That person told you 18 months ago they were going to retire, but you didn't do anything about it. I mean, I see that all the time, that jobs get posted after the position's vacant. And I'm like, did they spring this on you? Oh no, they told you 18 months ago that they had this in their future, but you didn't do anything about it. If you were bringing someone up from inside the organization, you wouldn't be in a panic mode. But if you sales, business development, I mean, basically any leadership role that has their own kind of department that they run, if that person leaves and you don't have a succession plan in place, you're losing productivity. And if you're losing productivity, you're losing profitability. And you can't afford to do that, especially in construction. The margins are so small that you've got to keep the momentum going all the time. So would you rather lose the momentum of business development and lose millions, or would you rather invest maybe a few $10,000 in developing people and having that next replacement in the pipeline? So you risk losing money, you risk being panicked, you risk having to go out into the marketplace and get the next best, right? Like if you're in a panic situation, you're going to say, okay, I'll hire that person because I need somebody in the role, as opposed to saying, I'm going to hire the best person. So one of the things that I do with my clients, once we have the immediate need addressed, is we define what is a leader in this organization? What do they look like? How do they behave? Because when we have spotted roles where we're going to have to hire from the outside because your incumbent says they're leaving in a year and we don't have time to prepare someone, we have to know we're hiring somebody who will mesh with this organization. Mm-hmm. And that every organization does leadership differently. Like when I speak to, I'm a Vistage speaker, and when I speak to the groups, one of the first activities I always do is, if you were to hire a leadership consultant to come in and teach leadership skills to your employees, what do you want them to be taught? And I, whiteboard the responses, and I've been collecting those, and I now have a list of 53 different terms. Well, you're not going to train people to be 53, to exhibit 53 different behaviors, right? But my point is, that's how wide-ranging people think leadership is. So you have to focus on what's leadership in your organization. So when we go outside and interview someone, we know that they are the kind of leader we want. Again, I work at the C-suite level. So my philosophy is, don't ask them about skills. Don't ask them about accomplishments, because how did they get to this interview to begin with? If you're interviewing them for a C-level position, we have to assume they already have those capabilities, right? So now, are they going to be a leader who meshes with us? So that's risk number one, is you bring in a leader who, that's number two, I guess. One is you're in a panic state. 2 is you're bringing in a leader who doesn't mesh, and then they upset the apple cart, and now you've got damage control to do as well. Or 3 is, as a small company, you are competing with bigger companies who have more money. And so at the very end, it's going to come down to how much salary you can offer. And that's not something you're ever going to win. Bigger companies are always going to offer more. Somebody's going to go to a bigger salary, even if they love your organization, just because the dollar signs are there. So when you raise people internally, you have I don't want to say captive audience, but I mean, they are bought into the values and the mission and the goals of your organization because they've been coming along with you. So capitalize on those people. Don't look outside. I mean, sometimes we have to. Like I said, if you're in a situation where, somebody's going to leave in 18 months, we just don't have time to bring somebody up. For the most part, don't have time to bring somebody up internally. So in some cases, you will have to hire externally. But in that case, I want you to hire a leader who meshes with your organization.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I'm sure you hear this a lot because even I hear it in my role. The objection from clients that they don't want to invest in their current people in case those people leave. So how do you deal with that? How do you convince them that if the person's going to leave, they're going to leave anyway, right? So how do you convince them that investment is worthwhile?
Productivity, profitability argument. I mean, if that position is vacant and you don't have anybody in the pipeline, you're just putting your dollars somewhere else. And I think you're wasting your dollars then. I mean, again, wouldn't you rather spend whatever thousands of dollars developing your internal candidates as opposed to going to a headhunter and paying a recruiter to find a good candidate for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do feel too, at some point in the future, not yet, because things are still in flux now, but I do feel like at some point, because the smaller companies can't compete on money, they're going to end up with the lesser quality future employees,
Yeah.
The good ones are going to be snapped up by the bigger companies. So bring them in apprentices right out of college, bring them in early and train them in your leadership culture and how your business works. And career paths are super important. It's part of the process. Like, show them in 3 years, you could be here. In 5 years, you could be here. But that means you're going to do thus and such to attain that role. And that means we're also going to provide this kind of learning and professional development so that you are capable in that role. And so it's not a fast process. I design career paths for clients, and then I layer on top learning paths, which anybody else that I know that does career paths doesn't do that, because I want them to have milestones that they have to achieve to get that next role. Because what you're hearing from a lot of employers of Gen Z is, they just want the title, but they don't want to do the work, or they want the title in 12 months when everybody else, it takes them 3 or 4 years. And my argument is that's just because you didn't show them the path. If you show them the path and say, to get from level 1 to level 2 is a 3 to 4 year process, and here's all the skills you'll need to learn, and here's all the classes or certifications you'll have to take, then they realize, it isn't just as simple as promoting me because I asked for it. I have to do some work here. I have to put skin in the game to get the promotion.
Yeah. It's almost like you have to communicate.
Oh my gosh, it's the word I say all the time. Like the default answer I give to all clients is when they say to me, why would this happen? Look what happened to me. I'm like, that's because you didn't tell them. That's exactly what I say all the time. Like, I just had a conversation with a company the other day. Interesting dilemma. They have a headquarters in one state. They have satellite offices in 4 other states. And the president told me that if they could get all those satellite offices to provide the same services as the home office, they could triple their income, but they don't have the right resources in the other offices because nobody from the headquarters area wants to move. And I said, that's because you didn't tell them they had to. When they joined the company, what you should have said was, if you want to get to this level of whatever, this title or branch manager or whatever, you're going to have to move 2 times in 15 years or 10 years. That's just what it takes, right? The Army does it when you join any military service. You're moving every 3 years. That's how they do it. So again, you don't know what you don't know, right? It's just a process. If you lay out the process, and during the interview and recruiting process, you say to them, here, we already have a career path for you. This is what it takes. Are you on board? Are you excited? And then they go, okay, I bought into this.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so why is succession planning particularly important as part of a proactive risk management strategy for construction companies specifically?
I think we covered that.
Yeah. Let's see.
I mean, I wouldn't say construction companies specifically. It's just you and I both have a love for construction companies. So that's
True. That's
the
true.
niche that we've chosen. But I mean, my process could apply to any small company. You know, I would say anything up to 1,000 employees where you really probably don't have a designated professional development process or department.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Can you share a success story where effective succession planning significantly mitigated risk for the company?
Well, I think, and you will probably agree, that if we successfully mitigated risk, you wouldn't know it.
Yes. I'm so happy. I did not set this up for you to say that intentionally, but I am so wildly happy that you said that, because people are always asking me. So I'm sure you get the same question. People are always asking me, well, like, okay, but like, how much money can you save a construction company with proactive risk management? And I'm like, I don't know. How do you value the lawsuit they never got? How do
Right.
you value the settlement they never paid? So I say that and people kind of just like stare at me blankly, and I'm like, but really though,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that this is not just a struggle that I have. Again, I did not intentionally set you up with that question, but I'm super happy that I'm not the only one that struggles with, like, you cannot, it's so difficult to quantify an event or an ROI based on something that never actually materialized. So
Right.
you know,
Because we prevented it. Right.
right, exactly. Okay, so even though I didn't set this up on purpose, now that I'm just like tickled pink that that was your answer, I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm just going to shift the question to just any success story where that you can share for maybe a construction client that you've worked with before, where they were able to successfully implement a succession strategy to everybody's benefit. Maybe that means that the exiting owner, it played out exactly the way that they wanted it to. Maybe it means that the company continued to thrive and grow as after the owner exited.
Yeah. So there's a construction management firm, former client, that I was called in to help with the succession plan right after the first transition. So there were 3 original owner founders, and they sold to 2 folks who had been in the company for a long time. One became president, one became COO. And the president heard me on a podcast or a radio interview or something, and called me and said, "This is your philosophy is my philosophy. Like, I need to get my next successor prepared now, even though I've only been in the job like 1 month." He literally called me like 1 month after he started the new job. But he saw the benefit of those 3 original founders mentoring he and the other, I was going to say young man, but they weren't. They were probably in their 50s at that point, but mentoring them and saying, you know, this is what the future can be. So that actually occurred before I arrived. And then what we determined with some, you know, analyses that I do with HRIS data and that kind of stuff, they had a 9-person board of directors. Well, 9-person senior leadership team, I should say.
Okay.
And 5 of them were going to be retiring in the next 4 years. So even though the president and the COO were new and we figured we had 10 years with them, we also the flip side of that coin was there's like half of your senior leadership team is going to be gone in the next 4 to 5 years. And so honestly, in less than 5 years, you don't have a whole lot of time to get the next leaders prepared. And small companies, lean and mean, right? Generally, you don't have a downline. Like, there was an HR director and she was going to leave in the next 3 years. She didn't have any staff. She was it. So I don't know that it's a success story in that, you know, that they had a succession plan. I think the success story for me, and you'll agree, is that we identified the risk long in advance, or not long enough for my comfort, but long enough in advance that we weren't blindsided by it. So,
Yeah.
you know, we had options. They had options.
That's amazing. So in that when you have a client that is that's that sort of framework, that kind of diagram of an outline in terms of it's actually 9 people that you're planning the succession strategy for. How does that intertwine with what you said earlier of your strategy in terms of like, my goal is to download the knowledge that I have into you so that you don't need me long term. I'm thinking if you're talking about an entire leadership team that is kind of alternating timelines in terms of what their succession looks like, to me, that seems like that might be maybe the exception to the rule, where you are doing a little bit more long-term hand-holding, even if it's just kind of check-ins. How did that change your normal framework?
Nope, that is the framework. That is the exact framework. Yep. Who's in your C-suite? Who runs this company that are in the key roles? And who do we get prepared to replace them? So that's really, it's hard to answer that without telling you the proprietary process that
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
But basically, I'll give you an exercise. I've actually published it in a CMAA article in the past, so I'll give you that. The most eye-opening exercise, any of your listeners can use this, is ask your senior leaders to name 3 people in the company who could possibly replace them at some point. Doesn't have to be next year, could be 3 years, like, people you see potential in, that cool, that's somebody I know I can start developing, help you start developing. And what the 2 outcomes that happen all the time. Oh, wait, hang on, I forgot a step in the process. So all the key leaders in the room, right? They get a piece of paper, they write down 3. They push it to the right, and the person next to them puts a check marks next to who they think would be the best. And we do that until all the papers come back to the original owner. Oh, the activity of checking is irrelevant. I'm not asking anybody. It's just part of the process. So the 2 outcomes that I always hear is, as the papers get moved around, you'll hear somebody look at someone else's paper and go, I have no idea who any of these people are. That is a bad potential leadership team if you don't know who the up and coming are in your organization, right? If you're business development and that person, the head of fleet maintenance or safety, and you go, I don't know who does business development in this company besides you, the person I see all the time. That's caution number 1, is you're not championing enough younger people in the organization, giving them special projects, giving them opportunities to be seen by the current leaders to start developing relationships with them, start being mentored by them. The other conversation that always comes out of this is virtually no one can put 3 people down on their piece of paper. And that's, again, because a lot of organizations are lean and mean, but also because they're keeping it all close to their vest, right? They're just not developing people. The funniest story is I was working with this is not funny, but it's funny. Funny, not funny. I was working with a client last summer. We did this exercise. They also had a 9-person leadership team, but it was a different company. And 3 people listed on their piece of paper the same guy.
Oh.
I know, including the COO and the CEO. And then I forget who the third one was that listed him. And I was like, well, clearly he can't fill 3 jobs. So who gets him? And then who do we have to look at? And what was worse is that guy had nobody on his paper. He was not part of the C-suite, but he was so integral to that company. They invited him to this meeting. And he had nobody on his, he had nobody on his paper. So right there, I stopped my work, right? What we have to do is make 8 more of this guy. Because assume 3 or 4 of them fall out, he's got to have a pipeline so he can move to the COO or the CEO role. And neither one of those folks who were currently in the role were looking to leave anytime soon, but they couldn't leave anytime soon if they wanted this fellow to replace them, because he had no replacements. So every situation is different. Like, that was oh my gosh, you have one bottleneck in this whole organization. Yeah. If you lose this person, he gets hit by a bus. And he was a regional vice president. He traveled all the time. And I'm thinking he could be hit by a bus any day because he spent so much time on the road. So, I mean, there you go. Two different organizations, 2 entirely different succession risk scenarios.
So what's your post engagement follow-up? Because what I'm getting at is it would drive me crazy to not know what ultimately ended up happening, when the CEO finally leaves. So do you stay in touch even just in an informal way to just be like, oh, you did pick the guy I thought you'd pick, or
no, I don't influence them that way at all. No, but no, I usually stay in touch with the person who's in charge of professional development. If they have an HR person, I don't really stay in touch with unless that person's on the C-suite team. But no, I generally just check in and keep feeding them content and resources and good ideas. but no, I want them to be self-sufficient. I don't, they can call me if they feel they need a tweak, but I don't want to be continually supporting them. That is my model is to give you the resources to be successful and walk away. Because I don't know. I just feel like there's this, like you said earlier, another billable hour. No, clearly I have a defined process. It costs this amount of money and you're on your own after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I guess you wouldn't be able to answer the question of like, do you have a client that maybe about where you just were like, you could see with like those outside, risk manage or risk blind spotlights, this is the clear path. And then the company just like completely did not do what you would have expected or wanted them to do if you were going to give that kind of advice.
I feel that happens more often than not, probably because I'm not there with my thumb on them. And so, life takes over and professional development is pretty nebulous. It's hard to see the positive results because they are so far down the road. But I think my approach is based on volume, because I feel like this is such an urgent issue that if I stayed with my clients, I would only be able to service, 4, 12, I don't know. But I want to teach the process to as many people as I can so they can do it in their own organization and I don't get stuck with them. I can move on to more. In fact, what I'm hoping to do by the end of this year is start licensing my process so that I can be in more places.
So, okay. So because, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because the air travel is killing me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. This is probably like the lawyer part of me getting excited about this. So this would be, so are you envisioning a little bit of like a franchise type of situation where you're training the trainers and then they're going out and they're doing what you do now, but they're able to touch more bodies because it's like more people?
Exactly. And they might touch more niches, right? I chose construction because I just like that industry. I like those people. I like people who work with their hands. I like people who are plain spoken, but there's a bazillion other small business industries that, other people would have an affinity for. So yes, for that purpose as well.
So what's the timeline on that?
I'm hoping by the end of this year. I have one more little glitch to figure out, which I'm hoping, I'm talking with a software developer in the next week or so, and hoping that when I say, this is what I envision, can it be done? That person says, yes, I can build that. And then I can do it. Because like I said, a lot of the work is here, right? A lot of the knowledge is here. So when I leave a client, after I do a 2-day workshop with them, that's the starting point where all the senior leaders have to be in the room. And we work through a lot of questions, big questions, scenario, what if, and I get an understanding of who's in their pipeline, who's not in their pipeline, what development they need, like that example earlier where we realized, they told me 3 people need risk management and then they're golden. We can move them into the C-suite. We just don't know where to get them the risk management training. Then I go back to my office for a few weeks and put together all those professional development plans. And that's the part I have to figure out how to replicate. But I have tons and tons and tons of resources. I just need to find a way to like warehouse them so that so another person could go, I need risk management, ding. I need I need communication skills, ding. And so and then the report would be created for them, right? Because they chose the right category. So that's what I'm hoping for.
That's amazing. I've never even thought about something that is such a hands-on service-based, offering to be able to be like licensable like that. So that's amazing. I hope you'll keep your LinkedIn community updated on how that's going because we are connected and I follow all of your posts. So I'm curious to follow that as well.
Well, what spurred this on is a summer or 2 ago, I said to myself, I lecture people, not in a good way. I'm like, I lecture people on succession planning and I don't have one. So how asinine is that? Yeah. So I'm like, so how could I have a succession plan? How can this company continue once I decide to retire? And that's when I came up with the licensing idea.
I love that. Now that's a great story right there. That's a great story. I love that. So I wanted to back up just a minute because you mentioned earlier that you are a Vistage presenter as well. For anybody who's watching who may not know what Vistage is, this is another one of the things that Nanette and I connected on because I've been a Vistage member since 2017. Vistage is, and you'll probably do a better job than I do. Every time I try to tell people, oh, you should join Vistage, and I try to give the like Vistage elevator pitch, it's atrocious. So I'm going to give mine, and then I want to hear yours because I bet it's so much better. But Vistage is essentially, it's basically a peer support personal board of advisors for C-suite and key role people in business. And you have a chair, and you oftentimes will have speakers like Nanette come in and give like half-day long 3-hour presentations on a whole host of topics that pertain to business owners, business leaders, and oftentimes for our group anyway, we have some non-traditional business stuff because we recognize that like we're whole individuals. So sometimes we'll have health and wellness and things like that. How is that pitched, Nanette?
I thought that was perfect. The word that I use is like a mastermind group for small business.
Oh my God, that's such a good way to, okay, I'm stealing that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything you said was spot on.
Fantastic. I'm so relieved to know. So my chair will be happy that I'm not spreading misinformation. Okay, so that's the background about what Vistage is, which watchers might need to know to understand my follow-up question, which is, okay, so if your primary offering is like a 2-day in-person, all the key stakeholders are at the table. Knowing what Vistage presentations typically look like, what format that takes, is your Vistage presentation sort of, is it like a precursor to that, or is it sort of the first part of that?
No, it's a precursor. It's basically educational. It's telling them what they didn't know, which is kind of how we started, right? Like if you want to sell, or you want to make it an ESOP, or you want to continue your legacy, you need to have a pipeline, and nobody's thinking about that. Nobody. I co-facilitated a presentation for a law group, actually, like within the last year. And we asked the audience members, how many of you have a succession plan? And this guy raised his hand, and we said, that's great. Who is it? Tell us about it. And he goes, it's my son. And we said, oh, okay. How old is your son? 4. Okay. 4. He was 4.
No, that's not.
Well, that's putting all your eggs in one basket. I spoke with a woman actually at that same, we'll call it a conference. I spoke with a woman who was really devastated because she had built her business and brought her 2 daughters into it. And they were both adults. And she bought a building so that they wouldn't have that worry or expense, right? She set them up for success. And within like the 6 months before I met her, both of them said, Mom, I don't want to work in this business. One said, I don't like it. And the other one said, I want to move to another state.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So even the best laid plans can go kaflooey, right?
Yeah. So had she followed your advice and had like 2 or 3 other options and she was able to pivot?
Oh, I mean, she would have had to have a whole bit different business structure, really. I think she was like a psychologist or something along those lines. So, I mean, those are independent people, right? It's hard to, you're going to have to establish a business if you then want to step out. Otherwise, you do just close your door.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One final question, and then I'm gonna give you an opportunity to pitch whatever you want our followers and listeners to know, and we'll let them know how they can connect with you. But the final question. How can companies get started with succession planning, and what resources or support should they seek in the beginning part of that process to just sort of get the juices flowing, start shifting their mindset and thinking about succession planning early?
I think the exercise that I just shared with you, like have your whole senior leadership team see if they could name 3 people. And just from that exercise, you're going to have a very robust discussion about the strategy of this company and what risks are around the corner. One of the things that I do before I go to see a client is I ask for a lot of HRIS data, and I also ask them to send out a survey, which I collect, comes back to me. They don't see it, but because I don't know the culture yet, because I haven't gotten there yet, but I always ask those who are going to be in attendance, what is your timeline for leaving? Is it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? Because I need to know how close you are to a crisis to know how to direct the conversation when I get there. And I think that's a question people are afraid to ask. You know, it's almost like being afraid to ask for the sale. It's like, should I close the sale now? Should I tell them how much money it is? I'll just keep the conversation going, right? They keep the business relationship going, but they don't have that honest conversation, which I think you said like an hour ago, like communication, right? They don't have that honest conversation that says, hey, Jim, you're like pushing 60 and, you know, my business is heavily dependent on you. And I'm wondering what you're thinking about in terms of retirement. Who are you preparing to, you know, take your place? Have you thought about that? Is there anybody you're coaching? Another easy way to start is if your company does performance appraisals, which a lot in this industry do not, but if you do performance appraisals, add a section on professional development and ask people, what are your career aspirations? I've always said, well, the stupidest question in a job interview is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because I'm like, I don't know, I haven't even joined your company yet. But once they're in your company, I think it's reasonable to say, what are your career aspirations here? What would you like to learn? Is there, you know, can I hook you up with a mentor? Could I move you to a different part of the business for a year so you can immerse yourself? Like, what jazzes you about this company? So that plays into the retention, right? If I feel I'm stuck in this job and I've already mastered this job and I'm not jazzed about coming to work anymore because it's the same job every day, wouldn't you love your manager to go, well, what else would you like to learn? I can help you do that. I can get you the certification, the training, move you to another department. So the certification and training, you're going to have some budget, right? But what companies don't do enough is apply for tuition reimbursement from the federal government. Tuition is reimbursable, or it's a credit from the federal government, which nobody knows and nobody takes advantage of.
Yeah, that alone is a huge tip. So when you say it's either reimbursable or a credit, you're talking about a tax credit, right?
Yes. Yeah. When you file your taxes,
That's a hot tip. Is there a place where people can look to find information and resources about that?
I actually have like a PDF, so I'll shoot it over to you and then you can put it as a resource. Yep.
Awesome. And feel free to comment it in the comments on this post and the replay too. So that way if people find it later. I'll upload this to my YouTube channel, so I'll link to it there too as well.
Great.
Which is a great natural dovetail into where can people find you to connect, and what do you have going on next?
Okay, so the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, because I am literally the only Nanette miner there. So it's pretty unique. I just met them on LinkedIn, and I was looking for them, and they were the only one of their name too. And I'm like, this is so amazing that you have such a unique name as well. So find me on LinkedIn. The website is successionplanningpro.com with hyphens in between. So succession-planning-pro. What do I have going on next? Well, I mean, it's just more of the same. I do a Vistage presentation once a month. So I'm usually going somewhere once a month. This month I'll be going to Connecticut and New York, 2 different groups, but one chair. He's in 2 different states. And then we are now just booking. So the 2-day workshop that I do is called a succession sprint, because I move you fast. You got to be awake, have a lot of coffee. We move fast through this process, the 2-day process. I don't stymie conversations at all, because it's important that everybody is bought in. Because if I have one bad apple who's like, it's not my fault you didn't plan for this, I'm retiring in 2 years, they're going to bring the whole process down. So I don't stymie conversations, because I want people to give their real feelings and how committed they will be. By the end of the 2 days, everybody ought to be committed and on the same page. But it is a fast moving process, because I could easily take 3 days to do this agenda, and I just don't. So we work like 9 to 6 every day.
Okay.
And it's a lot of, for me, and for anybody who I license this to, the 2 days is not the hard part, because I just throw out a big question, like, name 3 people, right? And then I gotta sit back and wait for it to play out. I'm like, okay, take some notes. I know where we're going. Okay, here's the next question.
Yeah. Wonderful. And what about the online course that you just released?
Oh my gosh, thank you. So this is funny and also sad. I, for years, have been contacted by HR people who say, I've been tasked with succession planning and I don't know where to begin, and there's no resources out there. And I always say, you're right, there's nothing. I mean, I invented this process because there is nothing out there. I mean, I've checked LinkedIn, I've checked If there are books on succession planning, there's really nothing out there that tells you how to do succession planning. So I guess I'm not a done for you service, but I'm a help you kind of service. So for years, HR people would call me and I would always say, I don't work with HR. I only work with the C-suite because this is a strategic initiative. This is a risk management initiative. I have a slide in my Vistage presentation that says that it's strategic and it's risk management. And if you're not in charge of that as a CEO, we got bigger problems, right? So yes. I only deal with the C-suite. And then sometime in the last year or so, I said to myself, why am I not serving the HR folks? I know I can't work up the chain. I can't start with HR and have them convince the C-suite. So that's why I start with the C-suite. But why am I not offering them something as well? So the course is called the Succession Planning Primer for HR. It is 4 lessons. They are video-based lessons. It takes an hour and a little bit to complete. And basically, it is the knowledge you can't find anywhere else. And where do you start? So like all of lesson 1 is that data collection that I ask for when I go to a client. I want to know how many people are over age 50. I want to know how many people are intending to leave the company in the next 2, 3, 5 years. I want to know what your turnover is. Again, if you like in construction, I have found that generally turnover happens at year 2 and at year 5. And if you can get people past year 5, they'll stay with you for 15 years or more. They'll stay with you for their career. So those are the 2 inflection points. So I want to know if you align with that, then I have different strategies for like career paths. Like you can get people past 2 years if you show them that there's a future that lasts 10 years. Right. But if they feel like I got hired into this job and I don't want to do this job anymore, that's when they start to look elsewhere. So that's like all of lesson 1 is all the data that I ask for when I go in. That's the data you need to collect so that when your senior leaders try to say to you, this is the pitch for the class, right? You're not in charge of this, HR. You're going to facilitate it, but you're not in charge. And so every time a senior leader tries to say this is your responsibility, I want you to have the data that pushes back and says, it's not, and here's why. So like I can't create a succession plan for you, CEO, if nobody stays in this company longer than 5 years. Right? And the data shows that nobody stays in this company longer than 5 years. So I've done my job. I can't do a succession plan. I will now turn my attention to retention if that's, if you agree to that. So it's a lot. So the first lesson is all that, like, I want you to be able to push back credibly and know why you're saying this because of the data that you collected. And then the other lessons follow on, which I forget what they are. And then the 4th lesson I do know is the 2 models that I have created about where succession planning fits with all the other responsibilities of HR. And then what are the 5 areas that I consider the critical, pretty much everybody considers, the critical leadership development categories that if you say, okay, now we are developing leadership skills, in what category? So there's personal development, like I have EQ, I have self-management is the word that I use. There's interpersonal, I can work collaboratively with others. Conflict doesn't throw me for a loop. I know how to manage a conflict situation and get us out on the other side. There's business acumen. How many people work for a company and don't know really how that company works? Like I just can't tell you how many people can't tell you who's in another department. If you had to call on finance, do you know anybody to call in finance? You don't know who your major customers are. You don't know who your competitors are and what they offer and how you compare against that. I mean, people don't know how their companies work. And then there's what I call the external experiences, like get people's heads up out of their own cubicles and see what's happening in the business world. And then the last category is what I call next level leadership, which is all those things that we expect leaders to have. And when they don't have it, we go, oh, but we actually never taught people, like being ethical, understanding strategy, understanding risk management. Just like nobody teaches risk management unless you're a risk manager.
Yeah.
Right? There's a job title for that. And those are the people who understand it. But everybody's job, especially at the senior level, entails some level of risk. And you have to, if you don't have that ingrained knowledge, you're going to make terrible mistakes, right? Again, you don't know what you don't know. So if you're going to make a financial investment that looks like a dollar investment, but really there's a whole back end of risk to it, you don't know that. So those are all that's the next level where I'm like, if you're going to be a senior leader, you need to bias, you need to understand all these things so that, you don't, so that you're successful. So that's a less stressful thing when you become a leader.
Oh, are you still there? Okay, I think we froze for just a second, but I think we're back.
Yep, we're back.
Okay. All right, so we are at our hour. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all of your amazing wisdom when it comes to succession planning and the intersection of succession planning for construction leaders and proactive risk management, because as we have talked about, we share some very similar hurdles in terms of getting people to understand how to value making some of these proactive investments. So thank you so much for your time, Nanette, and I will see you around LinkedIn.
Thank you, Megan. It was a blast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.